Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the Golden Hour, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, great to be here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, it's great being back.
Well, Kevin, I've been reading this book about habits, and one of the things the author emphasizes is the importance of creating many different good small habits so that they become almost automatic. So that as you repeat the behaviors, they just become like part of your natural way of being. So this might be something that we would call like getting routine, which we often talk about. Well, that's not a great thing. So I just want to get your thoughts initially on this topic of habits and routine and whether it's good that we have routines like this.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I really like that you use the word routine because that has so many different connotations, doesn't it? You could talk about my morning routine, and a person could really love their morning routine and think it's great, and still you call it a morning routine. But there's something about routine that has another kind of side to it, like when people like I remember someone saying, like I think it was a saint who said, "Routine is the sepulcher of piety." Okay, well that's a completely different use of the word routine. As the place where piety goes to die. So, like if you're, I guess, going to church or doing things just out of routine, well then it kind of is like the that inner life is going away. And that we have to make an effort to make sure routine doesn't slip in to important things, just like in any important relationship. If a person's dealing with their spouse or friends or kids, it had become routine, and then that would kind of mean like they're living in a somewhat alienated way from each other. And I think there's something very deep going on when we talk about routine in that deeper sense. But I was thinking, so you talk about routine in this ordinary sense of like in like having routines, then it seems to me that they're part of um, normal life than how you form any kind of good practice. That it has to somehow become less effortful over time. And I think that's what we mean when we talk about virtuous cycles. The virtuous cycle is something that's easier, to do with repeated use, which is to say that you don't have to think as much about every single step. And then in some way that means it does become routine. So does that capture the whole the I don't know, the area of what we're talking about here with routine being both something that's very good and bad?
Yeah, so I just kind of popped in my head that it's kind of good as a noun, like if you have a routine that you, so it's almost in a way being committed or being disciplined. I know we don't like the
Yeah.
word disciplined, but whereas using it as an adjective, when something becomes routine, it's like it becomes rote or thoughtless. So you want to have a sense that you have a routine that's good and that you're committed to, like a morning routine, but that you're doing it deliberately. You're doing, with full deliberation. And one thing we talk about is bringing your highest ideals into each one of your actions, which is kind of a lofty goal. And that seems inconsistent with routine in the second sense as an adjective, like just being routine. That's not bringing your highest ideals in, but you can bring your highest ideals into a routine that you do each day.
And that seems to be the best thing about routines, is then you're not having to think about when do I brush my teeth, when do I, and you can actually like have your thoughts be in better put in better places. So, and you can be thinking about this day as a whole and what hopes do you have for it. Wouldn't it be a great thing to think of how can my morning routine actually bring out the best inside of me? Like, what kind of things would I want to be looking forward to in the morning and looking ahead to this coming day? So getting ready in the morning and doing the exercise and all of that can be a way of preparing for the day to come in a very positive sense. Of really looking forward to the different opportunities you're going to have. It's like pre-framing the day. Well, having morning routines, then we're not having to dedicate so much, processing power to what am I going to do in this next, right next now. Well, that makes it easier to be clearing your mind for other things. I think you find that, like, in one sense, having these good habits in place, I keep thinking of the morning, but it could be any time of day, allows us to have more order than built in to our day. It allows us to be more peaceful because peace is the tranquility of order. And that allows us to be more interiorly silent and recollected. And so there is a way in which those routines allow us to really fully live each moment because we're not planning how we're going to live the moment. We're just simply living it. And that's a sense in which we do want certain ways of responding and acting to become second nature. I'd rather say second nature than automatic because automatic implies somehow it's thoughtless and it's like, I automatically swat at the thing that landed on the back of my neck. It's like, before you even know you're doing it to get rid of the bug that landed there. Well, but we want these higher things to be second nature so that they can be done with less and less effort. And again, as I said, that's part of being a virtuous cycle. As it becomes easier and you develop greater mastery and it becomes more enjoyable, the more you repeat doing it. So it seems to me that it's a height of self mastery to have all these things in your day, no longer requiring so much thought because you know the right way to get from office to home if you work out of the home. The best way to prepare this part of the day, and it doesn't require so much thought. And then you can put more intention into it.
Yeah, and it seems like in addition to being able to put more intention into it, uh, you can also, once you are consistent in being able to perform the routine, now you can start to think about how to do it better, which in a sense is like bringing a deeper intention to it or higher ideals to it, but also just think about any tweaks that you want to make to do it more effectively. And now I think it's especially relevant in the context of work that routines, we would maybe refer to them in the context of work as strategies, so that you have your ways of doing things that have become second nature, and once they become easy to perform in that way, then you can start to think about improving them. But until that point,
Yes,
you're just thinking about how do I actually just do them for the first time.
I think that's super important. So Ian McGilchrist talks about as in an example the between the how the left and right brain work together. That in learning to play, say, a new piece on the piano, well, maybe you hear it being played somewhere, and with your right brain, you're beholding the beauty of the whole piece. So you have this sense of the piece as a whole and the beauty of it. Well, then you might, you might be setting down yourself to try playing it. To actually play the piece, now you'll say you have the sheet music if you need that, and you're kind of going diligently through the piece to learn it. Then the goal is to transfer it to the left brain, which will make it routine. And so you learn how to do all the chords routinely, and you learn how to do the runs and everything. And you keep doing it again and again and again until it's routine. And then you put kind of in a sense transfer it back to the right brain so that when you're performing it for someone, now you're making it beautiful for this person. And so you're thinking of the person, you're thinking of how you want it to be for them, and you're putting more of your soul into it. You're trying to play it well. You're trying to play it better. So you're trying to get more of the nuances of the emotion in it, but all of that is completely right brained. Thinking of the audience and thinking how to improve this piece for their enjoyment is all right brained. Because the right brain is where we process things like bonds and other people, things that transcend this particular action. So the left brain is great for mastering things that get the little pieces, but the right brain puts them all back together and then can offer them to someone else as a meaningful act of love and service. So I think that's true in any kind of work, that we do need the left brain to help us to make certain things routine in the work. But that's precisely to free up the right brain to then put all this together in a way that actually is a better way of serving or somehow living some ideal in a more full way.
Yeah, it reminds me, I was just talking to someone who had competed in a poetry competition where they memorized a poem and then were reciting it. And what they said was they had to memorize it to such an extent that it would be unthinkable under any circumstances that any word would be wrong. Like it was, the whole poem was just completely second nature. If you said the first word, immediately, the all the subsequent words of the poem would just come out. And so they knew that if someone who got nervous would forget their poem, or they get under the lights and then they forget anything, it was because they hadn't memorized it well enough. So they wanted to just have any if anything happened, just they knew that they knew the words, and then from there they could build off that and intone correct, put the right intonation and the right emotion into it. So I think it's a similar thing going.
Yeah, and one thing routine does go with is certainty. So, and having routines gives us a certain sense of certainty and control in our day. But it also does help us to rest. Now, I think that we can kind of be way too into seeking certainty and control and everything, and that's what would be part of being excessively left-brained. But at the same time, it does help us to not have to, not have our whole day be just completely uncertain. How long will each thing last? How will everything take place? How does everything unfold? So a little bit of certainty is helpful, but again, it has to serve something higher, some kind of higher meaning, some kind of higher purpose.
Yeah, so that kind of gets into the maybe another good thing for us to talk about, which is how do we how do we ensure that the routines that we're building in our lives do serve a higher purpose and that they don't just become kind of ends in themselves, just things that we always do?
Well, that's a great question. I think that maybe there are some things that we never want routine to touch. And so you never want love to be routine. And I don't think any ideal live fully, you'd never say it's routine. Well, why is that? I think it has to do with the sense that for us to be entirely invested, or our whole heart and soul in an activity, that investment of ourself in it can never be routine. And so maybe one way of getting at that is by saying our intentions for doing an activity can never be routine. Those intentions need to be shaped continually. I think the routine intention in any kind of work is then, it's just the left brain goal of getting this done. And so I would say, if a person sits down to work and doesn't pause or in some way beforehand think about why they're doing it, then they will do it just to get it done. Because in a way, the routine intention for any task is to get that task done. Because it's the intention that you have, like, wait, why am I doing this? Well, if you're really wanting to be as loving as you can all day long, doing these acts of love and service, well, to turn everything into love means that you're making those things constantly new. And so you're thinking about it, how you're going to do it better, and how you're going to really put your heart into doing this well. But that's never routine. Doing something routinely, again, is going to be just about getting it done. And I think that's actually one of the main reasons that people stop growing in life, is that they're just having routine intentions for everything that they do. Once they get used to doing something, they never really think anymore about why am I doing it? And so they go to work each day not really thinking about why they're doing it. Or they make dinner for their family each day, but not actually formulating a new intention. Because love makes all things new, and so love, it has to be something new that's in this act to put love into it. Like, how do I do this in a new and better way, or just with new love, which would kind of summarize everything? But that can never be routine.
Well, yeah, what do you mean by forming an intention for what you do? I mean, I think I have a pretty good sense, but I think it's easy for that to just be about repeating. Is it just repeating words or saying, I want to do this for such and such a reason, or I want to cook dinner for my family out of a motive of love, and just kind of saying that is enough? Or uh,
I
yeah,
would say it's
so
definitely not about words. So I think
okay, yeah,
words can
I
become
kind of set
routine.
you up for that.
You did, yeah. So I think words themselves become routine. So you could have like a formula that you're saying before things and that's not what I'm talking about here. So imagine a person is, imagine a man works outside the home, and then he comes home, and he then has dinner with his family. Well, if he is not actively cultivating a sense of like wanting to put more love into that, or wanting to stretch himself in some way for love of his family, I think that the routine intention there, will set in, which is getting dinner done. And maybe the only thing it's really aiming for is the satisfaction of everything being complete and the satisfaction that the meal provides. But I don't think it can really, the routine intentions don't really go above satisfaction. And so it's going to happen that he's just going to get focused on getting this over with, or getting that, or that it being satisfied by the food. I think it takes constant work for him to ask himself, how could I be more loving and attentive to my wife during this meal? How could I be more available and supportive and cheerful with my kids? But that would require him going to dinner aiming for love. Like, okay, well, I'm like, and ideally, it's just he's looking forward to spending time with his family and to being lovingly with them. He's looking forward to really re-immersing himself in in the life of the home. And so that is just an example, but I think that kind of self-stretching or transcending, means that if he were setting a challenge for himself in that meal, it would be a kind of quality challenge. Like, how could I do this dinner in a better way possible? How could I be more grateful to whoever had prepared it? How could I be, more helpful in seeing it carried out? But he'd be thinking of those qualities, ideals that he would really want to use to challenge himself there. Having a challenge, I think, like that, a kind of quality challenge, especially because all these things ultimately are about love and service. I think having that challenge will naturally get him rectifying his intention, putting his intention straight, so that now it's not about the food and it's not about just getting this duty done, but it's really about what matters, which is spending this precious time with the family that he loves most. Does that give you a sense of, like, so it doesn't really involve words, but it could. He could, like, remind himself, I guess, with words.
And so, one thing you're saying is that you have to. It's the challenge and the intention go together. The challenge kind of solidifies the intention, so that the intention is a kind of sense of. I mean, it's an ideal that you want to strive for, which ultimately is going to be love. And then the challenge is, okay, how am I going to live that ideal in the concrete circumstances right now?
So the challenge, you could say, is what makes the intention actual. That it could be that, like, habitually he wants to be loving with his family, but if he doesn't actually challenge himself in a given meal to be more loving, it's really hard to know that that intention's there. And if he thinks about it and is like, okay, I'm gonna really challenge myself in dinner today to really be, you know, as cheerful and loving as I can be, maybe he'll see how hard that is, which means how actually his intentions had slipped from that. And that maybe it actually had really been focused on these other things. So I think in this sense, you when it comes to dealing with, like, people that especially people that you love, you don't want those interactions to be routine, because because it would mean then there's no new initiatives in them. There's no actual challenge being embraced in them. And I think that's how love grows cold. I think the sign of love is that there's new initiatives. And we keep having new efforts to get to know people better, to be more interested in them, to be more present to them, to give them our best version of ourselves in whatever way that entails.
Yeah, why is it in your understanding that it's so easy to just fall into routine? I mean, you can go a whole day without really thinking, okay, how am I going to challenge myself in this? How am I going to do this thing in a new way? Why is it so easy for us to get stuck in that kind of routine way of thinking about things?
Well, it's a couple of things. One is that I think that it's just easier to be coasting. And once you've figured out how to do something, like, what it actually looks like to get this thing done, then just going through it again and again, the learning curve then could easily just stop, and you reach a kind of plateau in that activity. And so that activity no longer takes real effort. So I think that's the so it seems like it's less energy then needs to be expended to do things. But I actually think that in the long run, it's routine itself that drains our energy, but in a much deeper, depleted way than the little bit of energy it takes to constantly keep struggle renewed. So it seems like in the short run, maybe it seems like we're expending less energy if we don't really challenge ourselves and if thing after thing during the day. But in the long run, we're actually enervated by it. Because we're given energy when we spend it well on our ideals. The more we expend our energy on what matters most, the more we get high quality energy back. But it does seem to me that there's this um, kind of promise that, oh, this is easier this way. I'm not going to challenge myself. I'm just going to go with whatever happens automatically or routinely. So there's less exertion, and then but it ends up getting drained of all me. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I think so. So how do you then kind of break that cycle? What kind of concrete advice would you give to someone who, okay, they have this sense, okay, yeah, I want to bring higher intentions into what I'm doing. I don't want to be routine, but then, you know, they get some hours into the workday and it's routine.
Yeah.
So what I think one thing we
Well,
say is a golden hour, like do a golden hour every
exactly.
day. And
That's the
that's
whole
like,
thing.
yeah,
You were just
go ahead.
saying, maybe you can talk more, Sharif, about this idea of like, what is the golden hour essentially? You were just, I liked what you said.
Oh, yeah, I was saying, well, we talk a lot about it as reframing mindfulness challenge before a time of work. But I was thinking that the golden hour is essentially taking an hour to practice how you work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the essence of it. And then one way to practice is by bringing in reframing, and another way is mindfulness, and another way is challenge. And
Yeah. I
so
think that's
you can
exactly
be
right.
practicing those different elements, but you always want to have this sense of flexibility with it, and also that it's there's like a way of growing in it and improving how you do it. So you can even start with, like, if you're telling someone about the golden hour for the first time, this is how I now introduce it when I work with high schoolers, for example, is to just say, okay, just take 1 hour where you focus on one thing. And I know that if they do that, they're going to be practicing how they work because they're not used to working that way. So just by doing that, they're going to be improving. And then later, I'll introduce the idea of ideals, and you can reframe the task according to an ideal, or you can challenge yourself according to an ideal. So introducing these different elements and making it, helping them grow more in their work.
Exactly. No, I thought that is such a nice way of saying it because this is why you don't also want to think about necessarily how many golden hours can I do a day. You know, not that can be done, and you can do multiple of them. But first, it's just the idea of having the right idea of a golden hour, and that it is an hour you're practicing changing, improving the way you work. And so you want to do that hour of work in a new and better way. And so it's where you, like you're saying, it's where you practice, you work. Well, that actually can never be routine. So that's something that always has to be somehow new, right? So that's the whole idea of like the practicing. It's if you think of practice as a kind of deliberate shaping. So I guess if you're like you're working on a forehand in tennis, you could do it where you just try doing as many forehands as you can, like a quantity challenge. But then you could be practicing your mistakes and learning the wrong form and making it go more deep into you. It can always change, but the only way your forehand will change is by setting a quality challenge, knowing what's the exact thing that, and then the quantity serves that. And so, yeah, then if you're doing a quality challenge, then doing 100 of them in a row with that quality being really well practiced, that's super transformative. And that's how I think of the golden hour, that the quality challenge is what rules everything. Because that also you could say is always something new. So if you're trying to practice working in a new and better way, then it means with some kind of new quality about it. And whether it's unitasking is the new quality for you, or it's some ideal is the new quality for you, and you're trying to bring these things in. So I think that um, then if you see a golden hour is where you're taking some really profound new approach to life of doing it in a new and better way and working on how you do it, and then you're just making it concrete. And in this hour, what does that mean? Well, that's where you're setting your intention and you're practicing this art of setting intentions. Because you say, okay, what am I going to aim for in this hour? How do I want it to look? What would be a way of making it somehow new and beautiful and loving? Okay. And then you find a way that is real in your head. Maybe you can put words to it, maybe not, but somehow you can see it. And then that's what you stretch for in the course of that hour. Well, getting used to doing that, I think that's how you learn how to set your intentions. Because the intention is not a formula you say in your head, it's actually what you're aiming for in the task. It's like, what's the purpose of that stretch?
Yeah, great. Well, I think that's a wonderful and practical note to end on. So I'll give you any time for final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think uh, we will I th- always be finding like the deepest sources of renewal in ourself when we can locate places where routine has most set in and where we are kind of most ossified in how we do things, and then try doing those things in a new and better way. And so hopefully the regular practice of golden hours leads people to gradually address every area of life in with a spirit of wanting to grow. That'd be my hope.
Great. All right. Well, Kevin, thanks so much.
All right, Sharif, thank you.
And we'll be back next week.